Hi there, you're listening to the Guitar Speak podcast, produced here in Sydney, Australia. My name's Matt Wakeling and thank you so much for joining me. Now today, for episode number 64, I get to speak with Dweezil Zappa, the one and only, and it was very exciting to hear that Dweezil and his band will be touring Australia and New Zealand in February 2018. Now you may be aware for the last decade or so, Dweezil has been keeping alive the incredible musical legacy of his father, Frank Zappa, by touring and performing shows all around the world. It was great to talk to Dweezil about the impact of getting so immersed in his father's music, what impact that had on his own style of composition and playing and putting bands together. We also talk about the masterclasses that Dweezil will be holding before each of the concerts, talk about his touring rig, and also some really exciting news about Dweezil's own solo career. Alright, it was a great honour to meet Dweezil, so let's get straight to the interview. Here we go. Dweezil Zappa, welcome to the Guitar Speak podcast.
Thanks for having me.
That's great to have you. There's a lot of buzz already just on the recent announcement of your 2018 tour of Australia.
Well, that's good because we love coming down there. So hopefully we'll get a lot of people to show up and make it so we can come there more regularly.
Yeah, awesome. When was the last time you were down under?
I think it's probably almost 5 years now.
Okay, cool. Well, that's great. And this is also the first time you've visited New Zealand on this tour. That'll be cool as well.
Yeah, we're definitely looking forward to that. That's exciting because I think my dad only played there once in 1976, I believe.
I love that that video you made with you and your band and the chalkboard map of Australia and New Zealand and the kitchen tongs.
Well, yeah, we were backstage at one of the shows on our last tour, and we just got confirmation that we were going to do the Australian tour. So they had asked if we could make a video to say hello to everybody and tell them we're coming down there.
That's great.
And that was the first attempt at the video. We just kind of thought, well, there's a chalkboard backstage, so we might as well pretend like it's some sort of a class that I was teaching with kitchen tongs.
It's great. Now, this tour is specifically celebrating 50 years of your dad's music, of Frank Zappa's music, and in addition to your incredible solo career, which you've been running concurrently, you've been playing Frank's music for well over a decade now. I find this whole story of you doing your dad's music very, very moving, and the excellence you put into it as a tribute. What does it mean to you to present Frank's music on this scale?
Well, first, thanks for the kind words. We appreciate the acknowledgement of the effort that we put into it because it is a lot of work, but it's always been a labor of love for me. I used to see my dad's shows as a kid, and I just thought of it like it was the most amazing magic trick that he could get people to play this stuff. And there were these hand signals, and the music was changing different directions. There was so much depth and variety in all the compositions, and it's just unlike any other music that I've ever heard. It's truly is its own unique style, just Zappa music. And when he was no longer able to tour anymore and he passed away, I started to notice that there were people that were of a younger generation that if the name Frank Zappa was mentioned, they would say, who? And to me, with all of his musical accomplishments, I just thought that was a shame. I thought younger generations had missed out on this magic trick that I'm talking about. So I set about putting a band together so that future generations could witness the music live on stage, commensurate with the way that my dad played it. And that was the goal, let the music speak for itself and learn it to the best of our abilities and leave no stone unturned as far as the details go.
Fantastic. And are you seeing much of a shift in the demographic when you talk about reaching out to younger audiences? Are you seeing younger people coming to these shows?
Yeah, we definitely do. I mean, you got to look at it and put it into perspective anyway. So when we started about 12 years ago, because, I started in 2006, the first demographic that was really showing up to all the shows were people in their middle 60s, and, there was maybe some people in their 50s and on down, but it was a smaller demographic initially there. So if we play for a decade or more, it's not the same people because, it's not, if we look out in the crowd, it's not 70-year-olds and maybe some 80-year-olds. It's going the other way, So there's a lot of people that have been very supportive of the tour and come to multiple shows on every tour. There's a guy from France who has been to 100 shows. We've played over 1,000 shows. In fact, maybe over 1,500 shows. And this guy's been to 100 shows. So we see him pretty frequently. And but he's not alone. There's a lot of people that come to a lot of the shows on every tour because we do change it up. And there's a lot of music that we're playing that my dad never played. We're playing album versions of songs where it really is intended to be the record arrangement and the sound design from the record, whereas my dad really didn't set about doing that. He was always working within the instrumentation of the band and making the arrangements that he wanted to play live instead of trying to recreate the record. So we have a lot of areas where we can play stuff from a record or do some other things that he really didn't get to in a live situation. And oftentimes when we're playing the record version, that's the version that people are most familiar with anyway. So they're excited to be able to hear that version.
That's awesome. There's such an enormous catalogue of work. It's an incredible body of work. How do you go about choosing material for a gig or a tour?
Well, it is a tough challenge. For this tour in particular that's coming down to Australia, it's a variation on the tour that we've been doing for a while, which is called 50 Years of Frank, and we're celebrating the 50-year anniversary of his first record, Freak Out. So what I did when I put the show together initially was featured elements from Freak Out and some of the earlier records of the Mothers of Invention era, and I wanted to make the show as much like a chronological time machine experience as I could. And at a certain point, it doesn't stay very strict on a timeline. It starts with the first record. It goes through the first couple of records. There's like a few medleys of some Mothers of Invention stuff, and we get into some Flo and Eddie era stuff that's really fun, 200 Motels era stuff. And by the time we get into the early 70s, then it starts to become... you start to hear some songs that are maybe more of the accessible songs that people might expect to hear, songs like Montana or Zombie Wolf or something like that. But generally speaking, the show is designed to bring you material that has not been played very much by my dad, and we're actually working on a version of a song called Rollo, which was played on one tour as there's it's kind of tricky because the song appears in various forms, but it's never been put together in all of the forms in one arrangement. So there's a rather tricky way of explaining that we are putting together all of the forms in one arrangement, so you can hear the way that song developed. And the interesting thing about it is that it has elements from Zombie Wolf. It has a part from San Bernardino. It has all these things. Before those things appeared on records, they were in this one song called Rollo, which also has pieces of St. Alfonso's Pancake Breakfast and all of these things. So it's a really crazy composition because it spawned many other things. And to put it all together in one home base medley will be fun, just because it hasn't been done before.
That's brilliant. That's awesome, man. What's the band preparation like that? I can only expect it's fairly grueling to get across such material and to do it well.
Well, when you have to learn some of these things that are complicated arrangements, and there's not any musical scores available, it becomes a lot of musical transcription, and we're fairly adept at that, having done this for 12 years now. And what we do is we check it against every known version that's been released,
okay,
and even the bootleg, so that we know that we've got it as accurate as possible. And for us, that's really the goal, is to play it as it's written or as it was performed when it was released, or if there's a really particularly well-known live version of something, But the reason that we stick so close to this stuff is that I really treat it more like classical music and not rock and roll music. Obviously, there's the rock and roll vibe that lives within the music, but as an example, when an orchestra is carrying forward the music of composers like Beethoven or Mozart, they're not trying to recreate the music for a modern audience. They're not bringing in urban sounds and drum machines and a rapper saying,
sure.
"Oh yeah, Beethoven, yeah," one time, So I mean, you don't need to do those kind of modifications to work such as this. And my dad's music to me falls in that category. So even though we're putting together arrangements of stuff that he didn't actually do live on stage, we know that there's recorded versions of each of the things that we are doing. We're just putting them together so that they connect. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting to be able to do something like that, but by no means am I saying, "Oh, let me rearrange all this stuff and do it my own way."
Yeah, sure. How has immersing yourself in Frank's music shaped you as a guitar player?
Well, the biggest change when I really set out to do this was there was a lot of technical stuff I had to change, physically change my playing, but the hardest element was that my dad had such a wide vocabulary, deep vocabulary rhythmically, and all of the harmonic tricks that he knew as a composer, not just a guitar player playing licks. He was able to respond to the music in real time and listen to the drums and listen to whatever instruments were accompanying him and answer what he was hearing. So if there was a rhythmic phrase, he'd pick up on it and he would answer it. And he had so many different harmonic tools to alter the landscape melodically. That's the biggest challenge. Is how do you expand your vocabulary, and how was I going to be able to play in context to the music so that it would sound like something that my dad would potentially have done, because I just didn't want it to take a complete left turn when it came to a solo. I wanted to still stay in context and use sounds that were evocative of the era of whichever song we were doing, and and all of that stuff. So it's been a very difficult learning curve to try to incorporate all that stuff. One of the hardest parts about it is that sort of extemporaneous improv world, trying to navigate that really without pre-composed ideas. Maybe I have some little strategies of things that I know I can rely on, but my goal is to do it like my dad did, which was to really just make something unique happen in those improvisational moments, and try not to repeat anything. So
Sure.
that right there is what takes anybody a lifetime to develop. That kind of vocabulary.
Yeah. You seem to love teaching. You hold the Dweezil teaching camps, and before your gigs on this tour, you'll be running guitar clinics. That sounds super cool. What kind of stuff do you cover in those clinics?
Well, the best thing that I like to offer people is a simple way to look at the guitar neck, because I think most guitar players, when they're just beginning, they get excited about it. They learn a couple of things, most likely the pentatonic scale, and they learn a few licks that they memorize. And then after a little while, after practicing the same thing over and over, they kind of hit a wall, and you often hear guitar players talking about, I want to get out of the box. I want to learn to play stuff that sounds different than what I already know. And so rather than say, hey, you got to learn a whole bunch of new stuff, the main thing that I like to do is show them how to use what they've already practiced a lot, but use it in several different ways. And one of the best, easiest ways to describe it is that if you look at the guitar as 3 sets of 2 strings, you could literally even take off 4 of the strings and leave 2 on your guitar when you practice this. But the idea is that with a pentatonic scale, you only have 5 shapes to learn. And when you know those really well, you can play them in any key anywhere. And the beauty of it is once you know those, it's the same on the other 2 sets of strings, and it's just divided by the octave. So suddenly the guitar neck is all connected in a way where you don't see boxes that are normally taught for the pentatonic stuff. And so it's like you suddenly have this lateral movement and the freedom to explore moving up and down the neck that way. And it's something that people get right away, which is really the best part about it, because they feel like, I could go home and practice this and have fun right away.
Yeah. Awesome. I love that idea of putting into groups of 2 strings, because that immediately rules out the awkward tuning discrepancy in the middle of the neck, where you move from 4th tuning to that 3rd for the between the 2nd and 3rd string. So that automatically just opens up the thing. As soon as I heard that idea, I thought, that totally makes sense. Why didn't the rest of us think of this?
Yeah, well, when I was a kid, I would learn how to play I would hit like an open A string, and then I would start looking for notes that sounded good if I played on the high E string or whatever. And I started to realize that there were all these shapes that were basically symmetrical, with the exception of 2 in a sequence. So if you played all 5 of these groups in the pentatonic scale, 3 of them are symmetrical and 2 of them aren't. So the 3rd and 4th shape, you can't play exactly the same position on each string. And so that's usually where people get a little bit messed up for a moment. But as soon as they figure that out, it really helps them to feel comfortable in any key, because you can. The other part of this, it's hard to explain without the visual, but
sure.
If you have one home base shape that you're playing in, I always describe that you have an immediate friend to your left and an immediate friend to your right. So if you are ever wanting to develop an idea and you want to move down the neck, I have this automatic shape that's right here. Or if you want to move up, you have this thing. So you start developing your strategy and visualization of the neck to always know that you have a position to your left or your right. And once you sort of develop that for all the positions, then it's very intuitive. The whole neck is always in play. You can go anywhere on any set of strings, and it just makes it so that you can make more call and response ideas and develop themes. So it's fun. I like to show it. It's real quick to demonstrate. I've also got it on a course online on truefire.com. I did a course that teaches this and a bunch of other things in depth, but it's that one is called Fretboard Freedom.
Okay, cool. Sounds great. And I mean, both that and the clinics, if our listeners can get to one, sounds like a fantastic thing to get onto. Dweezil, I know our time's limited, and I really want to honour that. Are you able to quickly talk us through your rig? What rig you're going to be bringing on this tour?
Yeah, well, due to the nature of the expense of traveling so far, I have developed a small guitar rig that travels easily. The biggest challenge I always run into with my dad's music is that he was so inventive with the guitar sounds from song to song and era, every different era. So the best way for me to be able to recreate all that stuff and keep track of it and be able to use it with presets and all that stuff is by using an Axe-Fx unit. Now, typically in my normal setup, I would use two Axe-Fx, the rack-mounted units, but for this upcoming tour, I'm going to use the floor unit, which is the Axe-8.
Oh, yeah.
It's the smaller version, just a single stereo thing. I normally have a quad setup, but in the little version, I can do probably 85% of what I can do in the bigger version of my rig.
Okay, cool.
But this version of the rig fits in a Pelican case in an overhead compartment. So that makes it quite a bit easier. Because in the past I've used analog amplifiers and a lot of rack units and stuff like that. Even some of the gear was stuff that was originally in my dad's guitar rack. But I've found ways to recreate it digitally that really sounds good. So that's the small version. I use a couple of different fuzz pedals and some other things along with it, but generally it's a pretty small setup that goes in an overhead. And then I'll bring a couple guitars. I'll have an SG and a Stratocaster.
Nice. Is that the Roxy model?
It's the Roxy model. Mine is a little bit customized. It has a Sustainiac pickup in it, which I use quite often for different textures and parts that I'm playing within the music. It allows me to get some different kinds of things that make it not sound exactly like a guitar. So when I want to have when I'm playing a part that would have been a keyboard part originally, or even a violin part or something, I can add a certain kind of texture to it that just blends it into the arrangement more and doesn't make it sound like, oh, suddenly you have too much rock guitar in the band. It's like it really does help make it blend into the ensemble.
Yeah, sure. And your Strat, are there any interesting mods you've done to that? The one I'm going to bring, it just depends. I might end up having to bring it back up, but the one I'm planning to bring does have this thing. There's a guitar maker. The company's called Echo Park Guitars. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's a Carina Strat with
cool.
Some specialty pickups in it. It's got a humbucker in the bridge and two single coils, but there's also this thing that is called a range bastard that's built into the guitar, and it's on a on a 5-way rotary knob, and it basically gives you some filtered sounds, and you have it in different combinations with the pickups that can be in phase or out of phase, and you can get a lot of extra sounds by flipping that rotary knob. So it's good for some of the recreation of some of the weirder sounds that my dad did, but it also does things that you really haven't heard before, because it's an oddball circuit, but it's passive. It doesn't have any batteries or anything.
Okay, cool. Sounds awesome. That's great. Well, listen, Dweezil, thank you so much for joining me today on the Guitar Speak podcast. Again, we're super excited that you're coming down to Australia in February 2018 and New Zealand. And I could talk all day. I would love to speak again, perhaps sometime more about your solo career. But it's been fascinating to talk about how you're bringing your father's music around the world and honouring his amazing legacy.
Well, I appreciate it. We can definitely talk more anytime. One thing that I think you might find interesting is that in November of this year, I'm going to be debuting some of my own orchestral music. There's a 100-piece orchestra in Holland.
Oh, wow.
We're doing 2 concerts, and I'm going to do about 35 to 40 minutes of my own orchestral music, and then playing some of my dad's music with the orchestra as well. We're going to do a version of Watermelon and Easter Hay and some other things. And I think also one piece by Steve Vai. So it's called Dweezil Zappa's Orchestral Favorites, and it's happening in Holland in November.
That sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
So I guess if we just keep our eyes on your website and your social media, we could keep up to date with all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the good news is we're going to record it, so at least we'll have an option to put it out at some point.
Oh, brilliant. That sounds great. Well, yeah, definitely we'll keep an eye out for that. Sounds great. All right, well, again, thanks so much, Dweezil. Really cool talking, and we'll see you in Australia in a few months.
Sounds good, thanks.
Okay, cheers. Thank you very much.
Sure, thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye now. All right, there you go, my conversation with Dweezil Zappa. And I'm totally looking forward to that tour. I'll just quickly run the dates by you. Auckland, 20th of February. Brisbane, 22nd of February. Sydney, 23rd. Melbourne, 24th. Adelaide, 25th. And Perth on Tuesday, the 27th of February, 2018. Check out the usual outlets for ticket details. Not only concerts, but the masterclasses before each show as well. All right, thank you so much for joining me on the Guitar Speak podcast. If you're enjoying the interviews, remember you can subscribe to us on iTunes or Stitcher or iHeartRadio or most podcatcher devices, and you can get our episodes free every single week sent to you. We've had interviews with people like Andy Timmons, Scott Henderson, Gretchen Mann, Jude Gold. Plenty of cool guitar playing folks have been on the show. So why not dig through the past episodes as well. You can also connect with us on Facebook or Instagram, and we'd love to hear from you on those forums. All right, thanks for joining me. My name's Matt Wakeling. You have been listening to the Guitar Speak podcast, and I'll see you next time. Bye now.